everybody. Welcome to Business Planning. This is my annual business planning we do every year. So I think this is like number 4. So this will be recorded, so we can put it on the Cardinal Nest and Samson University, so you can refer later. So hopefully everybody picked up a book. For those of you watching later, there'll be a link down in the bottom, so you can actually pull one of the business plans that I do. I'm going to be mainly talking about the Tom Ferry business plan today. I'm a Tom Ferry coach as well. And so what I'd like to do is run you through a little bit about business planning and why we should have one, and just sort of getting your thoughts. So I see this as being more of a working session. So I encourage you to be, taking notes, writing stuff down. I'm going to be asking you lots of questions you probably don't have the answers for yet, but that would be something that I would encourage you to do this afternoon or this evening. Because if you look at it, we're already at November, middle of November. And so basically whatever we do now, we're almost looking at this is already for 2026. There's still some chances that it might close in December, but it's going to be in January. So let's get started. So my commitment to you is to give you 100%. And then your commitment to yourself is to give yourself 100%. I think mindset is one of the really important things that we need to look at. And so, have confidence in yourself. So what I'd ask you for the next 30, 60 minutes is to, focus, no multitasking, please. Don't be on your phone, don't have the TV on, participate, have a little bit of blind faith, and we'll see what happens. So what do your goals look like? How many people in here actually have written goals? I know we all say we have goals, but do you have written goals? Anybody? Raise hands. It's it's important to have goals and to have written, just like it's important to have a business plan and have it written. If you think about it, it's how many people have a business plan that they come up and they're like, hey, I want to do 12 deals, 25 deals, 50 deals, 100 deals next year, and that's their plan. That's not really a plan. That's more like a wish. So my goal in this is let's get a written plan and goal set down. So are you ready? Are we ready for 2026? It starts today. We're not going to write this down and come in on January 2nd and start. We're going to start it today. So I love this. Are you ready? It's like why, how. Do you have a written plan? Do we have a plan of action? Do you have operation manuals? Do you have a budget? Do you have a marketing plan? Do you have a database? Do you have a website? Do we have a social media strategy? Are we willing to work? So I look at that, and you look around the room, and there's a few of those things you might have, but really we need all of those. So think about being a real estate agent or a real estate broker is that you actually run your own small business. And if you think about it, you're everything. You're the CEO, you're the CFO, you're the marketing, you're the operations, you're the sales. You do everything. So if we don't have plans of actions and processes and procedures for things, we're kind of just running in the dark and, waking up every day and just trying to figure out, well, I wonder what I'm going to do today. I want you to wake up and like, hey, it's going to be a great day. I'm going to do this and this and this and this. So that's what I'm going to help you get to today. So one of the things before we look at planning for the future is we look at where we are today. So 2025, how was your GCI? Your commission income. What kind of volume did you have? What was your average sales price? Where did those transactions come from? Did they come from open house? Did they come from Spear? Are you buying leads? Are you, how are you getting the business? What are your expenses? How many people actually have an expense program that they can track and measure their expenses? Or is it the big shoebox, and then all of a sudden April 15th comes around and you're trying to get the shoebox out like, oh, let's look at all of my expenses and what's my mileage and how much did I spend? And then I always love to ask, do you have a team? Looking around here, I think a lot of you guys are individual agents, but you're not. You have a team. We have a team even within our Samson network here. You have me, I'm Director of Brokerage Services, I'm one of your brokers. We have all of our marketing staff. There's a team. And then plus you have your team of Cardinal Title. We have our team of mortgage loan officers, your home inspectors. Everybody's your team. So think about this, is that you actually control quite a big business. So some of my favorite questions. What do you need to start doing? And that's not just in business. This could be in your personal life too. Do you need to stop, drinking? Do we need to stop eating 7 meals a day, 4 donuts in the morning? And then, what do you need to stop doing? So those are some pretty powerful questions. I usually like to pause there because, sometimes we don't think about this as much. But sometimes just the simple thing of what do we need to stop doing, sometimes that's even just a mindset, right? It's like if we are always having that negative mindset, what do they call it? The drunk monkey, knock the drunk monkey off your shoulder. I can do this. And so, I think some of this is really important. It's, what do you need to start doing? Maybe it's getting up a little bit earlier. Maybe it's planning. Maybe it's actually having a business plan. Maybe it's having an accountability partner. Maybe it's joining a coaching program here at Samson or outside. It's like getting involved in masterminds, just even taking advantage of everything that Samson Properties offers, from everything from our website to Real Scout to, the list just goes on and on and on of the things we provide. And I think that most of us probably we've signed up for some of that stuff, but we're using it like at a 10%. We're not using it at a 50, 70, or 80%. So let's start taking some time to learn how to use those programs. So let's start looking ahead. 2026. And this is where the participation comes in. So how many families do you want to help buy or sell homes this year? And did you notice what I said there too? I didn't say how many transactions, how much money do you want to make? It's like, let's start changing the narrative. Let's start changing the language. So if I asked each one of you, it's like, how many families do you want to help buy or sell? Yeah. So, but what I heard was, and I'm picking on you guys and I'll be your coach, as many as I can is not a goal. A goal would be, I'm going to sell 24 homes. I'm going to sell 50 homes. I'm going to sell 12. And it's having an exact number. Think about it when we try to lose weight, right? If we're like, hey, we're just going to lose some weight. Well, do you lose weight? No. But if we set a goal like, hey, we're going to lose, 10 pounds before the end of the year. All right, well, I'm no medical doctor, but that sounds like it's probably doable. Well, let's set a goal, let's set accountability, and then let's come up with a plan. And the plan's probably going to be, hey, I've got to maybe eat a little better, maybe I need to exercise a little bit more. Well, even that, I'm going to exercise. I'm going to walk, a half mile every day. I'm not going to eat junk after 9 p.m. I'm going to stop drinking, whatever it might be to get to our goal. And then we track and measure it. And then I always love to say, do your actions align with your goals? And so in that same case of weight, how many times do we bring donuts in and all of a sudden you're eating 4 donuts out there? It's like, all right, if we're trying to lose 10 pounds, maybe don't eat the 4 donuts, maybe just have 1. So love that part of it. But, think about that. How many families do you want to help this year? And I would tell you is that your limiting belief is probably too low. The number you're putting down there, you can well surpass it if you just come up with a plan and trust the process. So other things you can be committed to, having the most reviews in my area, with all the AI and stuff, if you put your name in ChatGPT and said, hey, I'm looking for the best real estate agent in your area, who comes up, right? And then how do you get on that list? Are you committed to earning 100,000, 50,000, $1 million? What is it? Do we need to pay off debt? Do we want to buy an investment property or 2? What do you want? What drives you? And these are really important questions. This isn't going to be a 5-minute conversation. This is going to be, lock yourself into the office, turn everything off, and just think. Because I think one of the hardest things is that if you come up to somebody and you're like, what do you really want? I think that's a very hard question to answer. So let's think about it. So, you got to have a starting point. So we got to look at, hey, where were you this year? Where are we right now? And then where are we going to go? And what you've done in the past doesn't determine what you're doing in the future. So 3 ways to create a lasting motive for action. create a more compelling future, create a legacy, align vision and behavior. We just talked about that. So what does that mean? Creating a legacy. I can tell you mine is that, at one day we're all going to expire. And so, I would love it to be 2 or 3 generations down the road as to where, if I have grandchildren, they start saying, oh my gosh, Grandpa did this, he built this, he did this, he's known for that. It was like, what do you want to be known for? What's the life that you want to create for yourself? And decide on meaningful goals. And what I love about business planning is that it's not just business goals, it's goals in everything. For those of you that have ever read The 7 Equities with Stephen Covey, there's everything from your spiritual to your education, to your family, to your money, to your business, all of these goals, and you can create more. I've created more when I've done that. And then you can step back and you can actually, set goals up for that, whether, maybe it's spiritual. So maybe then you come up and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to get more involved in the church. I'm going to start helping people, feed people on the weekends. Whatever that might be, I'm going to tithe a little bit more. Your education, your family, is the goal of your family is to maybe reconnect with people that you haven't spoken to in a long time. Maybe it's repair some relationships. Life's a little bit too short, so let's do that. And then it's visualize the results. Everybody laughs about the dream board. Those that don't know dream board, we used to have dream board parties. Chanel knows, we used to do them. And so, where we'd get the poster board out and we'd cut the newspaper articles out. I guess they still make newspapers or pictures, and we'd put them on the board, and that would be our dream board. And it was, what do you want? Is it the car you want? Is it the vacation? Is it the money? Is it a jet? Whatever it might be, just dream and put it up there. And so by doing that exercise, you have something in front of you, and it's very powerful to look at. And then be coachable. And I like to tell the story about what happened to me, is that, got a dream board, talking to my coach. My kids are very little. This is many years ago. It's probably, 18, 19 years ago. And one of the things on my dream board was a Disney Cruise Line ship. And so I had a 2 and a 4-year-old. And so I set my goals up that if we hit the goals, we were going to go on a Disney cruise. And so I'm working with my coach and I'm talking, and I had a bad week. And my numbers weren't there. I wasn't doing what I should be doing. And the coach was great. Okay, let's get back on track, get back on track, get back on track. And so, hung up the call, ready to go, had another bad week. Just didn't do what I should have been doing. And so that next call, he's like, all right, well, let's take a look at that dream board. And so I had the dream board sitting right in front of me. And he says, okay, let's rip the Disney Cruise Line ship off the board. And tonight at dinner, tell your family that, hey, we're not going to go on that Disney cruise because Dad isn't doing his work. And it was like, that's kind of the aha moment. So whatever drives you, right? It's like whoever your accountability is, whether it's a coach, whether it's each other, even the people in this room, hey, you showed up, that's half the battle. Exchange numbers and set up an accountability partner with each other. But I love that. And then I love the last part, stop playing small. Stop playing small. It's like, I always like being at some of these seminars and things where they just try to get you to think big. And, I think we all have limiting beliefs. But, if I ask each one of you right now to write down how much money you would like to make in commissions next year, and you wrote a number down, well, what happens if you added a 0 to it? Why not? Right? But is that a limiting belief, or is that a goal? Because I don't know about you, but I love being in the right room with people. And that's why I go to so many real estate conferences and things. I love to be in rooms with people that are doing, many, many transactions. Even look in this company, we've got teams that are doing over 500 transactions, a year. And so, if you look at the teams doing over 500 transactions, and then you look at yourself and you've done, 2 or 6 or 12 or 10, there's a lot more opportunity out there. So stop playing small. All right, the big seven and measuring your goals. We just talked about that a little bit, about the seven equities. This is the ones that I actually like to write down, is what are my health goals, my relationship goals, money goals, contribution goals, knowledge goals, fun lifestyle goals, and crazy inspiring goals. And so once again, it's having a plan. You know, even the relationship, if you're really honest with you, you know, what do they tell you? That your net worth is the average of the 5 friends that you hang out with. And so if you look at the 5 families of the 5 friends you hang out with, you guys are probably all within that same little range. So maybe increase that, right? Start going to different events. Put yourself out there a little bit. And then also, this isn't always about adding something. Sometimes it's taking something away. You know, or do you have the friend that is the most negative person in the world that you're like, hey, I'm going to sell 50 houses. There's no way you're going to do that. Well, you know what? Maybe that's somebody you need to push off to the side a little bit. But I think this is very fun, because it's like, you know, you look at money goals. It's like it's not what you make, it's what you keep. You know, how many people in this business has made 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, and they don't have any money in their banking account. They have no savings. They're behind on their taxes. Their credit cards are maxed out. You know, everything's mortgaged to the hilt. So sometimes it isn't all about making, it's about living within your means and living with budget. So how do we measure? So think about this. We have goals. Everything that's a goal, we need to be able to measure and track. And so if we measure and track, that's when you improve, because we can really look at things. So if you say you're going to make, you know, 5 calls a day or 10 calls a day or have 10 conversations a day, and all of a sudden at the end of the week, you've had 50 conversations and you're like, Dave, nothing's really happening. Well, then we can actually go back and look at actuals, you know, because if I come back and I'm like, how many conversations did you have? 50. All right, great. You know, who were you calling? Who'd you talk to? Well, that's going to be a better conversation than how many conversations did you have? Oh, a lot. Well, what's a lot? You know, is that 4, 5, 8, 10, 20? You know, so if we have it down, and then what we can do is we can start tearing that apart a little bit or breaking it down. It's like, hey, who are we calling? Are we calling the right people? What, you know, how'd the conversations go? What's the messaging? Do we need to change our script? You know, so it just gives us a little bit more accuracy as to where we can really look at our goals. Going back to the weight loss, right? How do we measure weight loss? We're going to put, you know, we're going to get on the scale, I guess, right? We're going to go to the doctor and get, you know, results and blood work and all of that. And so, you know, all of those things are measured and tracked. So I don't know about you, but when I go to the doctor, they're like, well, you know, some of these levels, it's like, all right, they're either going in the right direction, the wrong direction, or they're okay. And so, you know, if we don't measure and track that, we don't know what we need to do to improve in the future. So how many calls, how many texts, how many videos, how many appointments, how many listing agreements, how many open houses, how many signs you putting up? You know, all of this stuff is things that we can track and measure. And if you think about it, it's not all about cold calling, right? It's about doing things, trying it, and seeing what type of ROI we have on it, and then it's adjusting. And if it's not working, you either stop doing it or we change it. And if it is working, maybe you double down. Remember that we overestimate what we can do in 1 year, but we way underestimate what we can do in 3 to 5 years. I love that stat. I've been trying to figure out who said that the first time. I know more people say that, so I can actually quote that. But everything we track, measure, improves. We just talked about that. And I love this. If I do what others are unwilling to do for the next 3 to 5 years, I can do anything I want for the rest of my life. How many people agree with that statement? You know, if you went all in today and you're like, look, I'm going to kill it next year. You know, I'm going to have 25 conversations a day. I'm going to send postcards out to here. I'm going to send newsletters to here. I'm going to talk to my sphere. I'm going to do these events. I'm going to do a reel a day. I'm going to start a YouTube channel. You know, you start doing all of that stuff, there's almost no way you can fail. But if you think about it, it's like you got to start today. Got to start. So commitment and accountability. What'd you do this morning? You know, we're sitting here at what, 10 o'clock, 10:30. What did we do between whenever you got up? Hopefully it wasn't getting up at 10 o'clock. But, you know, did you get up at 7? Did we, you know, help get kids to school, spouses out of the house? You know, did we actually go to the office? Did we make any calls? You know, what the heck? It's like, you know, most of us are probably have already worked a couple hours, I hope. What time did you wake up? What'd you do yesterday? What'd you do last week? So if you're sitting here and you're like, hey, I want to sell my 25 houses. I want to sell my 50 houses. But yesterday you sat at home and watched television all day. You know, the day before you walked around the mall. You know, the day before that you were, you know, watching some YouTube video thinking I'm going to go be an influencer. You know, what'd you do? If I asked everybody to open their calendar right now, what does it look like? You know, does it have your day planned out? You know, I should probably pull my phone up, but you know, I pull my calendar up and it was like it's all color coded. Everything's in there, exactly what I need to do. Just like this meeting. Hopefully it was on your calendar. But if it's not on your calendar, it doesn't exist. So that would be the first thing that I would encourage you to do. Get a calendar. I don't care if it's a paper one, you know, if it's, you know, on your phone, if it's something, it doesn't matter. Use what works. You know, me, I'm an electronic guy, but I know a lot of the people I coach and a lot of my friends and even Samson agents here that they still have their, what do they call them, the day trickler or day timer or whatever it is. And if that's what works for you, use it. But if you don't have it on your calendar, it doesn't happen. What happens when you plan a vacation? If you're going on vacation for the holidays, you probably have that in your calendar, right? Hey, I'm going to leave on the 21st and we're coming back on the 27th and here's my flights or here's my train. It's like, well, why don't we plan our business the same way we plan our vacation? And everything in there doesn't have to be work related. It could be fun. You know, set up fun times. Set up times in your calendar as to when, you know, when are you going to prospect? When are you going to actually work? You've got to work in this business. You know, did you set time aside to Did you set time aside to work on your database to keep updating addresses and names and adding people in it and, you know, always constantly trying to figure out who you can put in there and contacting them? Why don't you take an hour every week to just learn something new? You know, maybe you don't know how to use Instagram. Well, go on YouTube and learn how to use Instagram. You know, maybe, you know, even here, take some of our classes with, you know, for the Bold Trail and Lofty. And then go home and play with it and set up the templates and set up the database and set up the smart list. You know, get things organized in there. So my question is what are you going to start doing today? You know, number one, are we going to get a calendar? You know, number two, are we going to get a plan? I hope all that's in there. So what's your commitment? And this is a very personal question, but, you know, I would ask you, are you interested in having a good year? Are you committed to having a good year? Are you obsessed with having a big year? And I've got a typo in there that says lay out your plan for 2025. We're laying out a plan for 2026 to bridge our future. So I'd like to actually read this out. But a plan without the will to execute is only words on a page. So write a message to yourself stating how serious you are committed to implementing this plan and being held accountable to it. Because I don't know, it's like you guys all showed up. So, you know, we're going to work on our plan over the next couple of days, and we're going to, you know, put numbers down, we're going to put goals down, and then we're going to carry this around. You know, have this with you at all times. Have things visual. You know, we're not going to fill it out, laminate it, and put it in the drawer. You know, let's actually have it out. Because guess what? Every month we're going to review the plan and see where we are. Are we on track? Are we behind? Do we need to adjust? I can tell you some of the most exciting things I love about business plans is that when we set business plans in place over the last month or so for next year, and then all of a sudden we're in March or April or May of next year, and people are at their goal, or they're going to hit their goal with their closed and pendings. So if I had a young lady that wanted to do 30 transactions, and last year in April, closed and pending, we had 30. So what do? Do we quit for the year and go to the Bahamas, or do we increase our goal? What do we do? So some of that was the limiting belief, right? Because, a lot of you guys have never really had a plan. We never really set goals. We never really set processes and procedures, and we never had the tools behind it to implement the plan. So what happens is a lot of times now you're going to set your goal too low. And then once you start doing the work and we start getting things in action, you're going to learn that your goal was too low. It's really exciting when people come into me and like, Dave, oh my God, I've got 9 pending. I've got 4 listings coming up. I need an assistant. It's like, okay, those are fun days. I love those days. More importantly than the commitment is the accountability. What additional resources are you going to put in for accountability? Guys, there's people here in the audience. I would change numbers with people in the audience right here and say, hey, you want to be my accountability partner? And you do it. I know some of my most successful years is I had a daily accountability call. We had 12 of us throughout the country. And those were the days we had to call into the ring. We didn't have Zoom and all of that kind of stuff. We had those conference rooms, that you paid for. And we would each call in at like 8 in the morning, and we would each set our intentions. It wasn't, how was the ball game? How was your weekend? It was like, no, hey, you know what? I'm going to have 22 conversations a day. I'm going to set 1 appointment, and whatever your goals are. And then right before lunchtime, it was 11:45, we would actually get on the call and we would talk about how the morning went. And so if somebody had some wins, it was encouragement. If somebody had sort of a rough morning, it was encouragement. But what it did is it helped hold us all together. And then what made it even more powerful is that we were a very close-knit group of people. We started setting contests and goals for each other. So in other words, those that hit their goals and did what they said they were going to do earned more points than the people that didn't. And then the people that didn't do their job, they were the ones that bought dinner when we'd all get together at conferences. And they weren't cheap dinners. So, it was like when you go out there, you want to order everything because you want it to hurt a little bit. So, all right. The why. Don't skip over this section. So when you're looking in your business plan, there's parts of the section in the first part of it that, fills in about, what is your why? What's your mission statement? What's your vision? We're going to talk about that for just a few minutes right now. But the why, I think, is very, very important. And I would say take some time for this. And I would say that after you've written your why, if you read it to yourself and it doesn't make you a little bit emotional or a little bit tear up, I don't think you have your why. The why is not, I want to make $1 million. I think the why might be more like, hey, I want to create a legacy. I want to create the best life for my family and my kids and be able to provide for my church. Whatever that is, what is your why? What motivates you? Don't write what should motivate you. Write what does. Acknowledge the truth. Guys, this is our own plan. So this isn't like this is homework for school. So don't write down what you think me or Donnie or Sarah or your manager or your wife or spouse, husband, whatever might want. Let's write down what drives you. We're all here for a reason. I get up every day and I'm excited to come to work. I absolutely love what I do. And so, part of that's my why. It's like, so I would love it if you're jotting down some notes. It's like, what's your why? All right, your vision. We've all heard of vision statements, mission statements. Now, what are some tools that we can use that weren't around like 5 or 10 years ago that we can use today? Can we use AI a little bit more? And when I say that, I'm not saying AI to do all the work for us, but going in and prompting AI for the right question, based on what you know about David Werfel, online, and looking at my vision, here's my goals, here's all this stuff, help me write a vision statement. So, you're going to have to put some stuff in, but let AI help you. And then ask AI to, hey, what other questions do you need to ask me? Do I need to answer for you so you can help me write my vision statement? Challenge it. Just challenge it a little bit. Mission statement, similar. What's your business purpose and means? It should be a simple sentence or phrase. The public needs to see it. So in other words, if somebody goes to your, Google My Business page, or they go to your website or whatever, what are you known for? What's your mission? And think about some of the other companies that you guys use now. What is their mission? What is their vision? Some of that stuff's always really important. So keep in mind what that is. And then your values. So I wanted to expand a little bit on the value side of things as to, what is your unique value proposition? So in other words, if let's pretend that I'm a customer, I'm either a seller or a buyer, and I come up to one of you and I'm like, hey, why should I work with you over this person? What do you say? Do you know what to say? Do you have anything? It's almost like having your elevator speech a little bit, right? But so, what is your unique value proposition? And I tell you what, you've got to work on that. Because, if think about how hard it is to get a listing now. And so if you're in competition with 3 or 4 other agents to get the listing, and they're ready to maybe move on to somebody else or whatever, and they ask you, what makes you different? Why should I use you? Well, what happens if you come up with something and like, hey, oh, that's very easy. I've got 5 things. I'm going to save you time. I'm going to save you money. I'm going to save you stress. What happens if you have, something written out where you've got it in your head? Think about it, just like how we practice our listing presentation and our scripts and dialogues. If you really go back and you list all of the objections you get on a listing appointment and on a buyer appointment, we're probably looking at 10 to 15 things they bring up. Well, what happens if we write down all of those questions that they ask or all those objections and then come up with an answer for them? And then practice it. And you don't want to be cocky when you're in front of them. It's like, yeah, give me another one, because as soon as they give it to you, you're like, no, you know exactly what you're going to say. So the same thing with values. So deliver value, embrace innovation, build and maintain trust, execute relentless discipline, strive for greatness, and then share your values with the public. People like to see the values. Isn't it kind of funny that we can do all of the business social media posts and all that kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden you post something about your family or your kids or something you did on the personal side, and that's where you get all the results, right? That's where you get all the likes and the loves and the comments. And so people want to see that, right? So if I referred something to one of you and said, hey, my sister's coming to town, can you help sell her a house? My sister would trust who I gave her, but the first thing they would be doing is they would be going into Chat GPT, they'd be Googling, they'd be banging and all of that, and they're going to pull you up. They're going to pull your social media up. They're going to pull it up. Let me see what this person's like. And so that's where it's important to have the different values and to do a little bit of both sides of personal and business. Okay, I know I'm throwing a lot at you. And I keep telling you a lot of this is important, but it is all important. So if we look at, what's your 10-year plan? I tell you what, this is one of the hardest things to do. And so within Tom Ferry, and like I said, I'm one of the coaches, so he challenged each one of us years ago to write a 20-year plan. And so, you start writing this plan out, and so I've done it. And I'm probably on the 20th version of it because it keeps changing. But, just sit down in front of a Word doc or a Pages doc or a notebook or whatever and just start writing. Hey, it is February 15th, 2045. How does that sound? 2045 or 2035. Okay. So what do we know? We know that it's a long way off, right? Justin's looking at me back there. But it's a long way off. But then it's not. I don't know about you, but it was just January 1st. It seemed like a few months ago. You know, I've got kids that one's graduated college and one's a third year in college. And it was like, I don't know where the time went. But I also look at Facebook and it shows 10 years ago and it was like they weren't even driving. You know, so time flies, right? So write out your 10-year plan. How old are you? You know, if you're married, you know, hopefully happily married, hopefully still want to be happily married. But, you know, hey, I'm going to be 69 years old, 65 years old, whatever it might be. You know, happily married for 45 years, you know, loving every day. You know, my kids are this old. You know, some of the stuff I have in mind is that, you know, you're projecting a lot of stuff. It was like, hey, you know, it's 10 years down the road. And so, okay, hey, I've got grandkids. You know, even though all of us have our own lives and we're living in different cities, you know, we still make it a point to get together and go to the beach. You know, I'm going to rent a beach house for the week and everybody can come. And, you know, and that's going to be our 1-year thing. And, you know, am I projecting that? Yes. But also it's like, you know, I'm projecting what I want to be doing with my time. You know, do I still want to be selling real estate? Do I still want to be coaching? Do I still want to be involved with the church? Do I want to be more involved with the church? You know, do you want to be involved with more philanthropy things? You know, what is it? Do you want to restore cars? Even as simple as, where do you want to live? Right? It's like, you know, I don't know about you, but I live in a fairly sizable house that was great when I had kids. And, you know, we moved into that neighborhood because it had playgrounds and great schools and swim teams. And, you know, it was a very kid-friendly neighborhood. Well, okay, I don't need that anymore. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going out today and moving, but, you know, I don't need that.
If you need a realtor, let me know.
I will, yes. Plenty of realtors out here to help, right? But here's the fun part. You don't have to know where you're going, but all of a sudden you can start looking. So, you know, like my wife and I, we've sat down and we've looked at this and, you know, we've identified like 4 areas that we think we might want to potentially look at. And so what we're doing is we're now planning vacation time to go down there, and instead of staying in the Marriott, we're going to go get an Airbnb and stay in the neighborhood and immerse ourselves in the neighborhood for a couple days. You know, pretend we live there. Go to the grocery store, go to the local pizza shop, go to the restaurants, you know, talk with the people that live there and see if it fits for us. But if you don't have a 10-year plan, what happens? What happens if you'd have did a 10-year plan 10 years ago? Would you be where you are right now, or would you be somewhere else? You know, think about most of the successful people that we follow, you know, in all the businesses, whether you like them or you don't, but, you know, the Zuckerbergs and the Bezos and Elon and just all these people. You know, do you think that they had a plan, or do you think they just woke up one day like, I'm going to build rockets, you know, or I'm going to build a bookstore, you know, whatever it might be? No, they had a plan and they worked it. So sit down, work your 10-year plan, write it out, and then share it with your spouse. Hopefully you're on the same page. Have them write theirs, have them work it out together. And I can tell you, it's like even sharing mine with my kids. You know, they read it like, oh my God, that sounds awesome. You know, how did you come up with that? And I'm like, well, you know, whether it comes true or not, that's my plan. But if you don't have a plan and something to shoot for, why do you get up every day? So, write your 10-year plan. Write your 20-year plan. Are we ready? This is a working class, so, you know, there's workbooks in the back, and like I said, online there'll be a link down there if you want to pull the link for the PDF. What I want to do is, let's start working at this a little bit. So, make sure you've got my information there. dwerfel@samsonproperties.net is my email, and my cell that you can text me or call me on is 703-932-1576. So wanted to make sure you had all of that. So let's get started. Let me flip over the screens here. See, we should have had a Cardinal title advertisement going there for the 30 seconds that it was.
National Pickleball.
There we go. Yeah, Justin says it's National Pickleball Month.
Stay healthy, Sam.
All right. So once again, everything I'm going to be showing you is in the book, but what I want to do is I want to focus on a few sections. And what I want to really look at is like our units and goals. And so, when we're going through this, what we're doing is we're looking for numbers, right? So you're going to have to go back and get some of your numbers for this year that you've done, or even the past couple of years. And so you can easily do that by going into MLS and running reports on yourself. Even here within Samson, if you've been here since the beginning of the year, you can go into the back end system of Darwin and pull your transactions and your commissions and all of that. But for purpose of planning, what's your average sales price going to be this year? So so if you're looking at buyers and sellers, put in whatever that number is going to be. Is it, what's your average price? And so, just like if you're like me, I've sold everything from a couple $100,000 to $2 million, right, this year. So it's quite the range. And then down here, it's like, what's the average commission that you charge? And so we're amongst Samson, so we're allowed to talk commission where we couldn't if we were in a group of people that were not Samson agents. But, when you fill out your listing agreement, how much do you charge to sell their home? If you're filling out a right to represent buyer agreement, how much do you put in there? And I would like to challenge each one of you that this is our worth, right? I sign listing agreements every day. And I sign buyer agreements every day. And I'm always amazed as to how many I'll sign that'll be a listing agreement for 4 or 5% to the listing side, or a buyer agreement that's charging 3 or 4%. And I'm not saying to, quote, overcharge or whatever that is, just charge what you're worth, because I see the other side of it too, where, I'm doing it for $500. I'm doing it for 0.5%. I'm doing it for 1%. And I'm like, and I usually try to call and always have a conversation. I'm like, hey, what's going on? And I understand that you might give a break to your family member or something like that, but bless you. But if this is something that's ongoing, let's look at that. So, in this case here, I would ask you to, once again, your unique value proposition. Why am I worth 3%, 1%, 4%, 2%? What is that? So for the sake of argument on this one here, I'm going to put in 2.5% on each one of those on a buyer or seller. And then here is where I want you to spend most of your time. So what is your transaction goal this year? And to work on that, what I'd want you to do is look at what you've done this past year. So let's say this past year you did 25 deals. Well, where'd they come from? Did they come from your database, sphere of influence, referral, online lead, open houses, geofarm, whatever it might be? There's other ways. Did you set in Starbucks, and get leads there all the time? What do you do? But if we look at where the business came from last year, we can kind of figure out where some of our business is going to come from this year. And then we can figure out what's working, what's not working, what we might want to add or not add. So this is where you put down. So if you see my screen, you can see down here I've got 35 deals. And then here's how it all breaks out. So from my database, I'm going to get 9 sellers and 5 buyers. Social online, 19 and 2. All right? Now, I was just putting numbers in. This is not mine. But you can always add stuff too. Just like down here, you can add a lead source, whatever it might be. Maybe you're calling expired listings. Maybe you're doing something special. Maybe you do parties, whatever that might be. And then, put this number in. And then what's going to happen is, this is where I want to spend some time on this, is that just like your database, here I have 14. Each and every one of you should have a fairly large number in database, because that is your past clients, your sphere of influence, your contractors, any leads, all of that. Everybody's in your database, right? And so let's say that you've got 200 people in your database. Well, How are we going to get 14 deals out of those 200? If we don't talk to them the entire year, are we going to get 14 deals? No. Well, what happens if we put them on a newsletter? Donnie talks about the paper newsletter we do here. What is it, $1.50 to send it out every month? So send that newsletter to everybody the first of the month. Maybe sell them an electronic newsletter in the middle of the month. Maybe get them on an email campaign as to where they're doing the deal of the week, the mortgage update, some article or something. Make sure that they're connected in social media. If it's their birthday, maybe send them a birthday video. Maybe set it up in Bold Trail as to where 5 days before their birthday, it lets you know, hey, it's their birthday. So you can send them a card or a little thing of cookies or something. Do the same thing for home anniversary. What happens if we do equity reviews for our people, right? Whether that's once a quarter, once a year, even just sending them, a short note. How many touches are you going to have? Are you going to send them a Happy New Year card, Happy New Year letter? Going to send holiday cards out. Me, I send out Thanksgiving cards every year. And they're very simple. It says thankful on the front and they're blank in the inside. I get them like in June or July and I start filling out 2 or 3 a day. And I'll probably send out about 250 the Monday of Thanksgiving. And so, that's just one of the things that I do that is my little touches. But I can also tell you, and team members will tell you here, is that, the majority of my business comes from my sphere of influence. There's nothing better than getting that email, text, or call saying, hey, Dave, got some friends that are just like us. They need to sell their 500,000 and go buy $1 million. That's, I think we'd all agree that that's one of the best calls. And so, that was just a few little things we talked about. Are you doing a pie event? Are you doing giveaways? Are you, look at what some of the bigger teams are doing. The Fox Group, Devin and Dustin, they do a thing over at Cox Farms where they invite, what seems like thousands, but it's, 500, 600, 700 people or whatever that might be. Now, did it cost them a lot of money? Probably. Did they get return on investment? Yes. Look at Casey Samson. Casey sends out, he's one of the biggest users of our print shop. How much stuff he sends in the mail and sends it out and spends money on that. Do you think that he's getting a return on investment for that? Absolutely. What's Donnie's favorite saying, right? If it works, you do it every day and twice on Sunday. So, see, I'm quoting you, Donnie. So, in here, you got to have a plan and an action plan behind each one of these. Open houses. Open houses are a great way of getting business, both listing and buying. If it's your listing and you do these mega open houses and you've got all this marketing and, we all know that 1 or 5 houses are going to show up within a few months of that, are they going to come back and say, oh my God, Chanel, did you see what Chanel did? She had a food truck and she had signs and she had banners and my God, it was like, there was like a parade of cars, coming to the open house. Maybe we should talk to her instead of our cousin that sold 2 houses an entire career to help sell. And then the same thing with the buyers, right? When the buyers come in, what's your process? Everything from how do you plan the open house to where's the signs go to how are they signing in? Are you doing a giveaway? What's the actions while they're there? What's the follow-up plan? And that's just mentioning like 5 or 6 things in there. What is your plan? For some of you newer agents that don't have listings and you want to hold listings, you want to hold something open, well, start researching early. Be particular about where you do your open house. If you live in Chantilly, why would you do an open house in Richmond? It doesn't make any sense because you don't know anything about Richmond, and then the customers looking in Richmond are going to want to buy or sell in Richmond, and you live up here. So pick the right property to hold open. Maybe not hold that property open that's been on the market for 3.5 years and, nobody's looked at it in a year. Maybe pick a popular area, make sure it's priced right, make sure it shows well. Make sure that you're advertising. Do we boost ads? What do we do? So very, very important to have goals and plans behind this, because once again, you just can't put something down on paper and not do anything. There's got to take action behind it. We can help you with action. So if you need help, just reach out, ask me. So as you're going through this, you're not going to have to fill out everything. There is a little part here that's actually kind of unique a little bit. I don't think it applies as much to this area as it would to like a beach town or a ski resort or something. But just where I put down that I was going to do 35 transactions, what it does is it asks how they're going to break out through the year. So, when you look at your year, does it tend to be that, you're very heavy in, that January, February, March, April, August, and then it seems like I'm usually very slow in November, December. So what it is it's just sort of breaking out and planning as to where most of your activity is going to be. And then, so we have the, let's see here, KPIs. So within here, and this is where I can help you. So what I would say is get these numbers together and then call me and we can go through this. But what we're trying to look for is how many listings you need to take. So in other words, we're going to start looking at, for every listing appointment you go on, how many times do you get the listing? It's probably not 100% unless you've only done 2 or 3. It's probably going to be more like that 80 or 90%. So what we look at is if I said, hey, I'm going to have 15 listings sell next year, well, I probably have to take 20, right? And then I probably have to go on 25 appointments. So I'll go on 25 appointments to take 20 listings, and then maybe only 15 sell. Look at how many listings are expiring, or they don't sell, or the people change their mind, or whatever. And so what the next part of the program is going to look at is, how many deals you have to do, and then how many conversations do we have to make that happen. So I don't like to call it cold calling, but what I want you to do is I want you to start tracking how many phone calls you make, how many texts you send, how many emails you send, so we can look at the response you're getting and where those responses are coming from. So that way, if you tell me that we've talked to 25 people in the sphere, we can tell what that return on investment is going to be. And then we can also start tracking out that, you really do need to know your numbers. So in the past, and I'm going to round my numbers up a little bit, I remembered that I used to have to talk to 25, and I'm making the math easy. I used to have 25 conversations with somebody before I got a lead. And in my mind, a lead was somebody that was going to buy or sell within the next 90 days. And then I had to have 2.5 leads to actually get a contract. So when I started tracking my numbers, I realized that basically for every 63 calls or conversations I made, I got a deal. Well, if you want to do 10 deals, you've got to make 630 calls. You want to do 100 deals, it's 6,300 calls. Now, if I told you to make 6,300 conversations today, you guys are all looking at me like I'm nuts. Well, how many days are you going to work this year? Are we going to work, 290 days, 300 days, 310? What is it? So all of a sudden, if you start working the math backwards and taking, hey, 6,300 divided by 300, well, that's like 20 conversations a day, which is still a lot. But if you want to make your goal, that's what you got to do. And then if we track and measure, as your skills get better and as the clientele and the people you're calling, you start calling the right people, that number is going to go down. So instead of it being 25 calls for every lead, it'll probably go down to like 15. So that's why we need to track and measure things a little bit. So looking at the clock here, it's already about an hour in, and I just want to go through the rest of the book as to where, fill it in. It's 39 pages. What it does is it's going to look for everything from, what social media platforms do you use? How do you do mailers? Are you going to do events? Are you going to do email newsletters, budget? It comes down here and it's looking at your operations, even just simple things as your tech stack. What does your tech stack look like? you can start with what Samson gives you, right? Your tech stack is SkySlope, it's Bold Trail, it's Real Scout, it's Showing Team. Well, Showing Team changed its name now, but whatever that is, let's put down what our tech stack is. And what's amazing about this is that sometimes by even just looking at what our tech stack is, we realize that we are paying for things that we've never used. So either start using it or cancel it, right? We've got to have our SOTs, in fact, and then the financial part. If you come down here, this is where you can get into your financial planning, which is, once again, you got to have a plan. Got to have a plan for this. What does your expenses look like? And even if you don't use this part of it and you just go out, it's like, how much does it cost you to live every month right now, personally? So what is your rent? What is your mortgage? What is your, do you have health insurance costs? Do you have car payments? Do you have credit card? How much does it cost for food and entertainment? And do you have kids and they're in ball sports or whatever it is? What is that number? Is it 3,000? Is it 10,000? Is it 20,000? I tell you what, it gets a little scary when you do it because a lot of people have never done it. They don't know how much it costs to live every month. And then guess what? You're a business owner. How much does it cost to do that? I don't know, but I've got 500 going to this site. I've got 400 going to ads. I've got, before you know it, you've got thousands of dollars that you're outlaying. And I don't know about you, but if you're spending all that money, you want a little bit of return on it, right? And so, even how much are you paying for cable TV? I'm amazed as how much I pay for cable and Netflix and Disney and, all the different streaming services because you had to sign up for something to watch something. And then, I've been paying them $29.95 a month. Maybe we should all quit our jobs and go get something. We get people to pay us $29.95 a month for the rest of their lives and get 1 million people to do that. We'd be wealthy, right? But let's look at it. How much does it cost you to take a listing? I know it's variable, but some of them is fixed cost, right? You got the sign install, you got the, how much are you going to pay for videos? Are you going to have, a video done? Are you going to have photos done? Are you going to print brochures? Are we going to spend postcards out? Are we going to boost ads? Are we doing videos? Does the videographer get paid? Are we doing it ourselves? Those are just 5 or 6 little things that we do. But how much does it take you for every listing? Which is very important because if you take a 1% listing and it's a $500,000 listing and you get $5,000 and all of a sudden it costs you $1,000 or $2,000 to get the listing up and running, well, that only leaves 3. And I don't know, there's savings and taxes, and I like to say that my family likes food with their meals. So, it's like, let's make sure that we've got this. But, so we've got to look at our budget, right? We've got to look at what our monthly expenses are to live. We've got to look at a savings plan. As real estate agents, we've got to set aside money for taxes. Retirement, retirement is not, there. It's like, I don't know about you, but, if it's 10 or 15 years and I'm still doing this, and I think I probably will be, I want to be doing it because I want to, not because I have to. 2 different ways of working there, right? So spend some time on your finances. And I tell you what, especially on the business side, it really does help when you start looking at, hey, I would like to do an event. I would like to send a gift to all of my clients every quarter or year or whatever that is. Well, if you've got a budget and you've got budget line items, you're like, hey, look, I've got $1,000 that I can use for whatever. Well, it's a little easier to save that $1,000 versus calling up American Express and like, how much credit do I have today? That's not how we should be doing this. So, and just in the end, has anybody ever done a SWOT analysis? So, just real quick, a SWOT analysis is looking at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so you can actually do a SWOT analysis for almost everything. In other words, if you're going to start a geofarm, maybe you look at what the SWOT analysis is for there. What are your strengths and weaknesses? What are the strengths and weaknesses of other agents in there? What are the threats? Whatever that might be. But, I would challenge you to look at this. I would say do this last because the first part of this is really important. So sort of in closing this out before we do any questions, spend some time on this. Write your 10-year plan. let's look at what our goals are. Let's look at where our activity came from this year. Let's look at where we'd really like it to be next year. And if you need help with that, any one of your managers can help. I'm more than willing to help. Give me a call. We'll sit down. We'll get on the phone. We'll grab coffee. More than happy to help you. But you've got to do some of the legwork up front. So we look at this and then really figure out what your why is and then try to break it down as to how you're going to get business. And then let's go all in. So, Justin, I think you've got a mic. Is there any questions? And we need to be on the mic because it's being recorded for later. And if I did a good job and covered all of that, that would be great too. So.
Anybody have any questions?
No. We got a quiet group today. I must have covered it well.
You did cover it well, Dave.
All right. All right. Well, in closing out, I really appreciate you taking the time. If you're watching this online, my number and everything was in the program. So please feel free to reach out. And looking forward to a successful 2026. I know that 2025 is always sort of a challenge. But looking back, my 2025 was actually a really great year. And I attribute some of that to is that I had goals and I showed up every day. So I think that's half the battle. So see you guys later. Awesome. My Venmo is, no, I'm kidding.